The lights hit like a storm. Flashbulbs explode in rapid fire, their rhythm syncing with the pounding bass of the runway music. A sea of faces watches in reverent silence as a young girl glides into view, elegant, statuesque, almost ethereal. She is Beverly Peele, just 16, but her presence already commands the room like a seasoned legend. Her gown sways with each step, catching the light like liquid silk. For that moment, the world belongs to her. But this isn't a slow climb to fame, it's a flash flood. Only a few years earlier, Beverly was a shy girl from Los Angeles, posing for local shoots and teen magazines. She grew up surrounded by the hum of a city that promised dreams, but rarely delivered them to girls who looked like her. Modeling began as a curious experiment, something exciting but distant. Yet her face, sharp yet soft, confident yet youthful, caught the eye of agents. By the age of 13, she was already in front of cameras that didn't just capture her image, they began to shape her destiny. The moment she signed with elite model management, her world transformed overnight. In an industry obsessed with the next big thing, Beverly became the next phenomenon. At just 14, she appeared in Mademoiselle and 17, effortlessly outshining older models. There was something magnetic about her, a rare mix of youthful energy and regal grace that made designers stop mid-sentence when she walked into the room. By 15 and 16, her rise was unstoppable. Fashion weeks across New York, Paris, and Milan opened their doors to her. She walked for Chanel, Versace, Donna Karan, and Ralph Lauren, moving through each runway like she was born for it. She didn't just wear clothes, she animated them. Designers described her as electric, photographers called her a natural, and editors whispered that Beverly was destined to become one of the decade's defining faces. Her image soon blanketed the fashion world, over 250 magazine covers, a staggering number that placed her alongside some of the most iconic names of the era. Vogue, Elle, Harper's Bazaar, she wasn't just featured, she dominated. For a young black teenager in the early 1990s, this wasn't just success, it was historic. She was breaking through barriers that many didn't even see existed. But behind the shimmer of campaign lights and the polished smiles at after-parties, Beverly was still a teenager, navigating a world built for adults, where mistakes were not forgiven and innocence was often exploited. She had no roadmap, no real protection, just her talent and the demands of an industry that moved faster than she could breathe. Backstage, while makeup artists adjusted her look for yet another show, she would often sit in silence, surrounded by people, but entirely alone. The language of the fashion world was glamour, but its grammar was power. And Beverly, at the center of it all, didn't yet realize how fragile that spotlight could be. The early 1990s fashion scene was a spectacle. Supermodels became cultural icons, and runway shows were global events. Beverly wasn't just participating, she was leading. In a sea of established stars like Naomi Campbell, Linda Evangelista, and Christy Turlington, Beverly held her own. Her youth didn't make her fragile, it made her fascinating. She was the new face of glamour, and everyone wanted a piece. This meteoric rise, from a quiet Los Angeles teen to the radiant centerpiece of global fashion, is the heartbeat of her story. It's dazzling, intoxicating, and almost too perfect. But every flash of brilliance casts a shadow. The same industry that lifted her into the sky was also preparing to look away. In the beginning, though, no one could see the cracks forming beneath the surface. All they saw was the spark, a teenage girl who seemed untouchable, striding into history beneath the hottest lights in the world. The world saw perfection. But behind the flawless runway walk and the glossy magazine spreads, Beverly Peele carried a silent weight, a weight no teenager should ever have to bear. She wasn't just another model, she was one of the few black faces on some of the most prestigious catwalks in the world. In the early 1990s, the fashion industry was still largely whitewashed, its standards shaped by Eurocentric ideals. Black supermodels had to work twice as hard to get half the recognition, and Beverly knew it, even if she didn't have the words to articulate it yet. Designers, editors, and casting directors didn't just see her beauty, they saw her as a symbol. She was the token, the representation, the exception. Every step she took down that runway wasn't just for herself, it was for every girl watching who looked like her. But the industry never told her that. They just expected it. When Beverly walked, audiences whispered comparisons, the next Naomi, a younger Iman, as if her worth could only exist through parallels to others. Instead of being celebrated for her individuality, she was constantly measured against a narrow standard, forced into a mold that wasn't of her making. Her presence broke barriers, but those same barriers pressed down on her shoulders like invisible hands. Behind the scenes, the glamour was stripped away. Fashion weeks meant endless flights, sleepless nights, and rehearsals that lasted until dawn. As a teenager, she navigated hotel rooms alone, crossed continents without guardians, and stood silently in rooms where adults discussed her career like she was a product, not a person. There were no emotional mentors, no safe space, no one pulling her aside to say, "Are you okay?" She learned quickly that vulnerability had no place in this world. If you showed cracks, they'd replace you. The industry loved perfection, not humanity. The media's gaze didn't make it easier. Headlines praised her beauty, but flattened her identity. Magazine spreads exoticized her, calling her striking, different, a rare face, as if her blackness was a novelty, not a normality. The press built her image with the same hands that would later erase it, crafting a legend while erasing the girl behind it. Backstage at shows, Beverly often found herself the only black model in the lineup, her hair and makeup handled by stylists unfamiliar with her texture or tone. Sometimes, she had to do her own makeup to look presentable because no one on the team knew how. It wasn't just physical labor, it was emotional labor, a daily reminder that the world she had entered wasn't made for her. And yet, she smiled. She walked. She performed. She carried the weight silently because she had no choice. The stakes were too high. She wasn't just representing herself, she was representing the possibility of every young black girl who dared to dream of the runway. The comparisons intensified as her fame grew. Being dubbed the next Naomi Campbell sounded glamorous to the outside world, but to Beverly, it was a cage. She respected Naomi, admired her brilliance, but she wasn't a copy, she was her own story. Yet the industry refused to see her beyond archetypes. They didn't ask Beverly who she wanted to be, they told her who she should become. As the music swelled and the lights grew brighter, Beverly's smile widened, but inside, the pressure tightened. With every photoshoot and runway, the line between image and identity blurred. She was no longer just Beverly, she was a brand, a symbol, a mirror for other people's expectations. This was the cost of being extraordinary in a world that only made room for one at a time. And for Beverly, the applause that followed her every step on the runway masked the silence that greeted her when the light's success has a rhythm, a steady, dazzling beat. But in Beverly Peele's story, that rhythm began to shift long before the world noticed. She was still a teenager when life forced her into adulthood. At just 17 years old, Beverly became a mother. In a world that demanded perfection, this was treated not as a personal milestone but as a scandal. The same industry that had celebrated her youth turned its back the moment that youth took a different shape. Behind closed doors, whispers traveled through casting offices and designer meetings. She's having a baby? She's not serious anymore. The fashion world, ruthless in its expectations, punished her for being human. Instead of supporting her, they quietly replaced her. Bookings slowed, campaigns disappeared, and doors that were once wide open began to close without explanation. For Beverly, motherhood was real, grounding, and filled with love. But professionally, it marked the start of a slow erasure. She tried to balance both worlds, the flashing cameras and the midnight feedings, but the industry had no room for complexity. It wanted the illusion of the untouchable muse, not a young woman with responsibilities. And then, almost overnight, the aesthetic of fashion changed. The mid-1990s brought the rise of heroin chic, pale, waifish, and deliberately detached. The once dominant image of radiant supermodels was replaced by a colder, thinner, edgier look that designers labeled as modern. Black models, who had already been fighting for representation, were pushed even further to the margins. Beverly, once the face of glamour, luxury, and elegance, suddenly didn't fit the new image. It wasn't about her talent. It wasn't about her beauty. It was about a shifting cultural obsession that left little room for those who had defined the era just a few years earlier. She watched as the runway changed, as her peers adapted, and as younger faces emerged, not necessarily better, just more in tune with the new trend. Beverly wasn't fading because she lost her spark. She was fading because the industry changed the rules mid-game. And as if that weren't enough, money became a ghost. From the outside, people assumed supermodels lived like royalty. But behind the glamour, Beverly's finances told a different story. As a teenager, she had never been taught how to manage sudden wealth. Contracts were complicated, agents took large cuts, and many of her earnings were mishandled or lost before she even understood their value. She was gracing the covers of major magazines, but the checks didn't always reflect the image. Modeling, despite its illusion of riches, often left young models, especially women of color, with little financial security. There were no financial advisors, no mentors, no safety nets. As the bookings slowed and her image was pushed aside, Beverly began to feel the economic pressure in ways she had never experienced before. The glamorous lifestyle demanded by the industry clashed with the shrinking opportunities being offered to her. She had built a career on being indispensable. Now she was being treated as disposable. These years, the late teens and early 20s, were supposed to be Beverly's golden era. Instead, they became the turning point. Young motherhood, industry shifts, and financial mismanagement formed a storm that would shape everything that followed. The lights on the runway still shone bright, but for Beverly, the glare began to sting. What had started as a meteoric rise now hovered at the edge of uncertainty. The girl who had once been everywhere was now watching her reflection slowly disappear from the very world she helped define. Fame can be a fragile thing. For Beverly Peele, the glittering veneer of success began to crack in ways the world never saw. In 1995, a car accident changed everything. The physical injuries were serious: broken bones, hospital stays, months of recovery. But the invisible wounds ran deeper. During the critical peak of her career, Beverly was forced off runways, missing campaigns that could have defined her legacy. While she healed, the fashion world marched on indifferent. Designers replaced her with younger faces, magazines turned to new-it models, and the girl who had once dominated over 250 covers became invisible almost overnight. The accident was more than physical, it was symbolic. It marked the beginning of a period where silence and neglect replaced applause and recognition. The industry, which had once celebrated her brilliance, now seemed to turn its back, as if forgetting she had ever existed. Beverly felt the isolation acutely. Being sidelined was one thing, but being erased while the world cheered the next wave of talent was another. The media's silence added to the weight. Unlike her white counterparts, whose every stumble was reported, Beverly's absence was barely noted. Articles that could have championed her return instead glossed over her story. It was as though history itself had decided she was no longer relevant. She had to grapple with erasure in real time, seeing herself replaced while the world watched without acknowledgement. Attempting a comeback was a bitter struggle. Beverly returned to modeling sporadically, hoping to reclaim her place, to remind the world of her talent. But the industry had moved on. Trends had shifted. Photographers, designers, and magazines were chasing novelty, not legacy. Even with her skill, beauty, and experience, she was pushed to the periphery, and the frustration of trying to reclaim a stage that had been hers was crushing. As opportunities dwindled, personal struggles intensified. The pressures of early fame, the trauma of the accident, financial instability, and the isolation of repeated rejection created a heavy emotional toll. Beverly faced legal hurdles, strained relationships, and the relentless mental exhaustion of having built her life in an industry that rewarded youth, beauty, and compliance, and punished independence, misfortune, or deviation from its ideals. Behind every smile and polished photo, there was a private battle. The girl who had once turned heads at 16 now navigated adulthood with a cautious, wary resilience. Each decision, each attempt to rebuild, came with the knowledge that the world might simply look past her. She had experienced firsthand the industry's cold efficiency. It lifts you high, but when the light dims, it leaves you to fall alone. And yet, through this silence and collapse, Beverly endured. Her story, though painful, was not over. The world may have ignored her struggles, but she carried them with a quiet dignity, a strength forged in shadows, waiting for the moment when the truth could no longer be ignored. This period, filled with accidents, erasure, failed comebacks, and personal turmoil, defines the heart of her tragedy. It is the stage where the glamour of the runway is stripped away, revealing the cost of fame, the human vulnerability, the emotional labor, and the resilience required to survive a world that often celebrates you only to forget you. The lights of fashion shows no longer shone as brightly for Beverly. The applause faded. The magazines no longer called. And yet, the story she carried inside of brilliance, struggle, and quiet survival would soon find a voice too powerful to remain unheard. Years of silence can become a weight impossible to carry. For Beverly Peele, the quiet that followed her collapse was shattered by revelations that no one could ignore, a reckoning decades in the making. The storm began with the Peter Nygaard scandal. Beverly's daughter, now grown, filed a lawsuit alleging years of sexual abuse by the powerful fashion executive. Suddenly, the industry that had ignored her struggles was forced to confront the dark realities lurking behind glossy campaigns and glamorous runways. But Beverly herself could not remain silent. The courage that it took to speak out, after decades of fear and suppression, became an act of personal liberation and collective revelation. For years, Beverly had carried invisible scars. The world had seen her face on countless covers, but had never glimpsed the pain behind the smile. Now, the truth emerged. Her experiences mirrored those of many young models, often marginalized, often voiceless, navigating a system that exploited both talent and vulnerability. By coming forward, Beverly reclaimed her narrative. She was no longer just a subject in magazines or a fleeting icon of fashion. She was a witness, a survivor, and a voice demanding accountability. The act of speaking out was not without cost. Old memories resurfaced, moments of fear, betrayal, and helplessness, forcing her to relive pain long buried beneath ambition and work. Each interview, each public statement, was a test of endurance. But it was also catharsis. By naming the abuse, Beverly transformed personal trauma into a powerful statement against systemic exploitation, highlighting how the industry too often sacrifices human lives for profit and image. Even as the world listened, she faced the emotional toll of survival. Fame had promised safety, respect, and opportunity, yet it had delivered pressure, erasure, and danger. The glamorous stages where she once walked freely became symbols of a system that elevated and discarded in equal measure. Her resilience, forged in the shadows of isolation, accidents, and financial struggle, was tested once more, now on a public battlefield. Through it all, Beverly's story illuminated a larger truth. The beauty and power that fashion celebrates can mask profound injustice. She showed that the image on a magazine cover is never the full story. There is always a life behind it, complex, fragile, and human. By stepping forward, Beverly not only exposed those who abused their power, but also gave voice to countless others who had suffered in silence, transforming her personal tragedy into a collective reckoning. Her survival was not about triumph in the traditional sense. She did not win in the way a campaign or contract might signify success. Her victory was in speaking her truth, in holding the industry accountable, and in refusing to let her story be erased, a theme that had haunted her since she first walked the runway at 16. The scandal, the revelations, and the act of breaking silence also offered a window into resilience. Beverly's courage reframed her narrative. She was no longer just the girl whose image graced countless covers, but the woman who endured, who spoke, and who demanded to be seen not just as a model, but as a human being. This chapter of her life, filled with scandal, confrontation, and the reclamation of voice, serves as the emotional climax of her story. The tragedy and exploitation that shaped her early years now give way to truth, reflection, and unyielding courage. It is a testament to what it means to survive an industry that often forgets its brightest stars when they are no longer convenient or controllable. In this moment, Beverly Peele's story becomes more than a tale of fashion. It becomes a story of survival, of integrity, and of the power of truth to illuminate the darkest corners of a glamorous yet ruthless world. The runway lights have dimmed. The applause has faded. The magazines, once crowded with Beverly Peele's radiant face, now turn their pages without her. Yet, even in absence, her influence lingers, subtle, quiet, yet undeniable. Beverly's story is not one of disappearance, but of legacy in the shadows, a testament to the resilience of those the world almost forgot. Her impact on the fashion world is often invisible to casual observers, but it runs deep. She paved the way for Black models in an era when representation was scarce. Every young girl of color who dared to dream of the runway walks today in the space Beverly carved out decades ago. Her presence challenged industry norms, demanded acknowledgement, and proved that elegance, strength, and beauty are not confined to a single ideal. Yet, legacy and erasure are entwined. The same industry that once celebrated her brilliance quietly sidelined her. Her name is not commonly spoken among today's supermodels, her story is not often told in history books, and her achievements are overlooked by those who rewrite fashion's narrative to suit convenience. This tension, being monumental yet forgotten, defines part of Beverly's tragedy. Her life is a mirror reflecting how fame can be both immortal and fleeting, public yet profoundly private. Culturally, Beverly's journey offers lessons far beyond fashion. It is a lens to examine the intersections of race, gender, and power, revealing how societal structures can elevate and exploit simultaneously. She embodies the contradictions of an industry that sells dreams while consuming the dreamers. Her story underscores the cost of visibility for young women of color, a cost measured not only in lost opportunities and erasure, but in emotional labor, vulnerability, and survival. As Beverly reflects on her life today, there is a quiet dignity in her gaze. She has seen the glamour and the betrayal, the applause and the silence. Yet, she has also reclaimed her narrative. Speaking out against abuse, surviving professional erasure, and maintaining her personal integrity have transformed her from an image in a magazine into a symbol of courage and resilience. The closing scene lingers on contrast, archival footage of Beverly at 16, radiant and untouchable, juxtaposed with the present-day woman, composed and reflective. The smiles, the lights, and the flashbulbs remain a memory, but the wisdom, strength, and voice she carries now are far more enduring. She gave the world her image, but they forgot her name. And yet, Beverly's story insists that names can be reclaimed and histories rewritten. Her legacy is not merely the glamour she embodied, but the truths she now speaks and the courage she inspires. It is a reminder that even when the industry moves on, the human story endures, echoing far beyond magazine covers, fashion weeks, and fleeting trends. The final reflection is both melancholic and empowering. Beverly Peele's life is a narrative of brilliance, exploitation, survival, and reclamation. It is a cautionary tale about fame, yes, but also an affirmation of resilience, proof that the individual behind the image, once silent and unseen, can rise to define her own truth. Her story closes, but not in finality. It ends with a quiet, persistent call to remember, honor, and learn from her triumphs, her pain, and her unwavering spirit. Beverly Peele is more than a supermodel. She is a testament to the human cost of beauty, power, and perseverance.